Mesdames et messieurs, merci de prendre vos sièges pour que nous puissions continuer avec la plénière numéro 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, you probably saw this morning, we're going to put it on again. On your screens now will be a short film prepared by the organization Cartooning for Peace. They report cartoonists on the line. The situation of threatened cartoonists around the world is available now. So let's have a look at their film. Thank you. A big round of applause. Thank you for Cartooning for Peace. Their report is now available online.
Absolutely, and so we are delighted to welcome you for the second plenary of our Forum for Democracy. Democracies, as you know, deliver the highest standards of human and civil rights in history, but what are the real criteriums for a peaceful societies? To discuss this purpose, we are absolutely delighted to welcome our panelists. First of all, Miss Estelle Desprez, activiste et créateur of Saint-Blancardien, France. Thank you to welcome her with a little applause. Madame Desprez.
Thank you very much. Now, please welcome, he's a human rights barrister at the Clooney Foundation for Justice from the UK, Mr. Geoffrey Robertson.
And our last and third panelist is member of the Montana House of Representatives of the United States of America, Miss Zoe Zephyr.
So once again, we will follow the same format as we did for the previous debate this morning. That's to say, there will be introductory remarks by our panelists, and because there are, as you have seen, slightly less of them, I'm sure we will have much more time for your questions. There are quite a few people who said they would like to ask some questions this afternoon. So if we could ask you for your introductory remarks from Semblant de Rien, Estelle Desprez. We'll start with you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Le 20 avril 2021, les Américains se sont arrêtés de travailler, ont laissé leurs courses en suspens, ont fait une pause en allant chercher leurs enfants à l'école, les yeux rivés sur leurs écrans, l'oreille tendue pour écouter le juge Peter Cahill énoncer un verdict historique. Vous êtes reconnu coupable, vous êtes reconnu coupable, vous êtes reconnu coupable, ce sont des mots que Derek Chauvin ne pensait pas entendre. Il n'échapperait plus à la justice. Dans l'État du Minnesota, ce fut la première fois qu'un policier blanc était condamné pour le meurtre d'une personne noire. Cela faisait presque un an que nous retenions notre souffle, hantés par les 9 minutes et 29 secondes d'agonie de George Floyd. Le 25 mai 2020, nous étions tous un peu morts avec lui, en visionnant les images diffusées dans le monde entier, filmées avec l'un des seuls outils de défense que nous, personnes racisées, avons en notre possession, un téléphone portable. Entre le 25 mai et le 26 mai 2020, mon compte Instagram qui lutte contre le racisme, Semblant de Rien, a pris plus de 20 000 abonnés en quelques heures. Pour la plupart, des personnes blanches choquées d'apprendre la surexistence du racisme venant s'abreuver d'informations sur ma plateforme, souhaitant faire quelque chose, demandant la fin de l'impunité, de la brutalité et l'éradication du racisme systémique. Enfin, nous étions ensemble. Alors, nous nous sommes rassemblés à Paris pour Adama, à Bruxelles pour Lamine Bangoura, en Suisse pour Mike Ben Peter, au Brésil pour Claudia Silva et pour tant d'autres que je n'ai pas le temps de vous citer, qui sont mortes lors de contacts policiers avec le seul point commun d'être des personnes noires dans des sociétés structurées par le racisme.
I'm sorry, we have a problem at the moment. There's no English. Il n'y a pas de traduction apparemment. Je ne sais pas d'où vient le problème. Vous voulez qu'on attende 1 minute pour qu'on nous dise s'il y a un problème avec la traduction? There's a problem with there's no English translation. I can translate sentence for sentence if you like, but
maybe you make a little resume of what you just heard. It is.
It was.
We started with the condemnation of the policeman who killed
Chauvin,
George
and it was
Floyd.
the first time that I don't know how you say a personne racisée. What's the correct term for that in English?
Racialized people,
Racialized
non-white
people. I prefer you give me the correct term. Had in their hands a weapon so that they could fight against this, which was mobile phones, and that totally changed the whole situation because they were able to document what happened. Is basically what you said in a much more poetic way in French, but I'll just give you the general resume. Do we have any solution to the problem of not having an English translation? Otherwise, I can translate what you say.
Maybe let's start like this, and when it works, the English translation, you tell us, okay?
Okay.
Please continue.
Could I just translate sentence by sentence? Give me a sentence and I'll put it in. Okay.
So, nos États ont réagi en nommant les spectres du colonialisme et du racisme et de l'esclavage.
Is there a translation?
Yes.
Okay, we did it. This is the occasion to give a big round of applause to our interpreters, our dolmetschers. Without them, we couldn't talk to each other. Thank you.
Donc, ce que je disais au début, c'est que ça a été vraiment historique, le fait que Derek Chauvin fut condamné pour avoir tué George Floyd. Il a été condamné pour meurtre. Il y a eu 3 chefs d'accusation qui ont été retenus contre lui. Il va faire 22 ans de prison. C'est rare que ça arrive. Que ça soit en Belgique, aux États-Unis, c'est rare qu'un policier soit condamné pour le meurtre d'une personne noire. C'est extrêmement rare. Et donc, après ça, ce qui s'est passé, c'est qu'il y a eu un énorme mouvement social. Il y a eu une prise de conscience. Au niveau politique, nos États ont commencé à parler du colonialisme, du racisme et de l'esclavage. Aux États-Unis, il y a des réformes qui ont été mises en place dans l'institution policière. Au Royaume-Uni, le gouvernement a reconnu la nécessité de lutter contre les inégalités raciales. En Belgique, le jour de l'indépendance du Congo, le jour de la célébration de l'indépendance, le roi Philippe a exprimé ses profonds regrets pour les terribles exactions infligées par le passé. En France, le président Macron a annoncé la restitution d'artefacts sacrés pillés au Bénin pendant l'agression coloniale. Alors oui, il y a eu quelques statues de la honte déboulonnées, il y a eu des promesses faites, des déclarations politiques antiracistes fortes, mais force est de constater que la plupart de ces déclarations politiques antiracistes n'étaient que performatives. L'Union européenne a diffusé un plan de lutte contre le racisme qui est efficace, qui prend en compte et qui nomme le racisme structurel et systémique, qui nomme l'héritage historique du colonialisme. Mais nos États refusent encore aujourd'hui de reconnaître qu'il y a du racisme structurel dans nos États. Si on refuse de nommer le problème, on ne peut pas le résoudre. Alors, il y a peu, le nouveau rapport sur le racisme anti-noir de l'Agence des droits fondamentaux de l'Union européenne a dévoilé que près de la moitié des personnes d'ascendance africaine dans l'Union européenne font face au racisme et à la discrimination raciale au quotidien. Et ce, dans tous les domaines, que ça soit pour la recherche de logement, pour avoir un emploi décent. Au niveau de l'éducation, il n'y a pas un seul aspect de la vie des personnes noires qui ne soit pas touché par le racisme. L'Agence des droits fondamentaux de l'Union européenne se dit choquée de l'absence d'amélioration depuis leur dernière enquête en 2016. Personnellement, certes, je partage leur effroi. Le racisme choquera toujours. Je pense qu'il est très important de rester choqué face à ce qu'il se passe, mais malheureusement, je ne suis pas surprise en tant qu'activiste. Parce que ce schéma, il se confirme à travers la répression brutale des manifestations et la volonté de les interdire. Cette hausse se manifeste aussi quand, dans mon pays, la Belgique, un petit garçon de 9 ans, Mathis, se retrouve plaqué au sol sous le genou d'un policier dans son école primaire à Naline. Vous savez, dans mon travail, je suis confrontée à l'horreur que trop de personnes semblent s'habituer. Il y a des personnes qui semblent s'habituer de voir des images de violences policières. Moi, je ne m'y habitue pas. C'est des images choquantes. Il n'y a pas un seul mois où je ne suis pas face à ce type de violence qui émane de nos États. Mais je suis aussi à l'écoute des profonds traumatismes raciaux qui touchent ma communauté, de leur souffrance psychologique de ne pas être vue et entendue, de leur souffrance d'être traitées de victimes lorsqu'elles essayent de visibiliser les violences qu'elles subissent. Alors je vous avoue que ça fait 4 ans que je fais ce métier et je me sens souvent démunie face au nombre d'événements si graves qui se déroulent avec le si peu de soutien et de ressources que nous, les activistes, avons en notre possession. Il n'y a aucun doute que nous sommes face à un profond backlash après George Floyd, qui se déroule dans un contexte marqué par les mouvements extrémistes et suprémacistes et la propagation de concepts fumeux comme le wokisme, utilisé par ceux qui perçoivent notre prise de conscience des inégalités raciales et notre volonté de les résoudre comme une menace. À travers cette stratégie, on tente d'isoler les activistes, on tente de nous empêcher de travailler. Cette montée de la haine n'est pas le fruit du hasard, elle n'a rien de nouveau. C'est le résultat d'une histoire agissante qui nous pousse à admettre, comme Martin Luther King l'a déclaré il y a 55 ans, qu'il y a encore une majorité de personnes blanches qui souhaitent une société qui soit à la fois une démocratie pour eux et qui soit simultanément une dictature pour les Noirs. Alors des solutions, nous les avons. J'ai évoqué le plan de lutte contre le racisme de l'Union européenne, qui, comme je le répète, a le bénéfice de nommer le racisme structurel. Mais nous devons prendre conscience avec ce backlash que le racisme est incroyablement résilient. Non, ce n'était pas pire avant. Nous vivons juste dans des systèmes qui changent. Il prend juste de nouvelles nuances. Aujourd'hui, on n'a plus besoin d'avoir des personnes qui soient explicitement racistes pour que nos structures ne puissent plus l'être. Nos structures restent racistes, elles restent ancrées dans un paradigme colonial, voire néocolonial. Il est urgent aujourd'hui de se rendre compte que le racisme est, comme Bell Hooks, la théoricienne féministe et antiraciste, disait, inextricablement lié à d'autres systèmes de domination qui sont le capitalisme et le patriarcat. Nous devons absolument percevoir le racisme comme un problème global. L'avenir de notre planète en dépend. Alors je garde espoir car aujourd'hui, nous sommes réunis au Forum mondial de la démocratie pour avoir cette conversation. Nous sommes réunis ici parce que nous sommes nombreux à avoir la volonté de créer une société juste et une société de paix. Nous pouvons mettre à profit nos compétences et notre énergie, mais seulement nous devons rester déterminés, concentrés avec la ferme volonté de protéger les droits humains. Et nous devons vraiment essayer d'imaginer une société où plus jamais un enfant, un homme ou une femme ne mourra dans les mains des forces de l'ordre. Nous sommes totalement en capacité de construire ce monde pour qu'il soit une réalité pour toutes, mais ce qui nous empêche, c'est notre apathie. Nous devons faire face au déni. Alors je vous le demande, êtes-vous prêts à faire semblant, à arrêter de faire semblant de ne plus voir le racisme ? Merci.
Juste par rapport à ça, je vous apporte une précision. Je ne sais pas si vous savez, mais ce week-end, samedi, l'ouverture de la BBC, c'est sur un discours du roi Charles, qui était au Kenya, et qui a exprimé ses regrets pour la colonisation, mais qui ne s'est pas excusé. Il a exprimé ses regrets, mais c'est pas excusé. Ça faisait la une de la BBC samedi matin. Je ne sais pas si vous savez, mais c'est tout à fait dans le cadre de ce que vous venez de dire.
Tout à fait. Merci beaucoup pour votre remarque. Mr. Geoffrey Robertson, the floor is yours.
Is the microphone mine?
Normally it works. Just make like this.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. It's great to be here at this event celebrating the virtues of democracy, the system of government called by Winston Churchill the worst, except for all the others. All the others are making a comeback. There are 92 countries of the world which are dictatorships or non-democracies. 54% of the world's population is in them, oppressed by them often. They are, I guess, there are too many tyrants. There are authoritarian, totalitarian regimes, dictatorships by army and religions. And they're getting more hostile, more aggressive. What is there to protect? I mean, in Ukraine, tens of thousands of people are killed to defend their democracy. And that may be the case in Taiwan very soon if threats are carried out. The elected government, the elected president of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, is in a prison cell. In Hong Kong, democracy is entirely dead. And here in the European Union, last month, a little democracy was just snuffed out. It was Nagorno-Karabakh, where for 30 years it had had the indicia of democracy, free elections, free press, independent judiciary, and suddenly the aggressor, Azerbaijan, came with its guns and it had to save its people by being ethnically cleansed. Not a word from the Security Council, not a squeak from the organizers of this event praising democracy. What is there in the world to protect democracies against aggression? Certainly not the United Nations. The word democracy does not figure once in the UN Charter. The UN preamble begins nobly by saying that its purpose is to save the world from the scourge of war. Article 1 of the UN Charter says it will suppress aggression. Gee, it's making a good job of that at the moment, isn't it? And the reason it's making no job at all is because of its design. The General Assembly is a talking shop. The Security Council, poleaxed as it's been for some years, is not fit for purpose because of the veto wielded by the 5 permanent members. Thus, Russia vetoes any resolution calling for a ceasefire in Ukraine. America last week vetoed a resolution calling for the ceasefire in Gaza. So, in effect, they're of no use. As a matter of interest, I took another look at the UN Charter to wonder what would the UN do if Russia dropped a nuclear bomb on Kiev? You know the answer? It would do absolutely nothing. It can't expel Russia under the Charter. It can't expel unless it's got the resolution and recommendation to expel from the Security Council. So Russia, of course, will veto any resolution to suspend it for dropping a nuclear bomb on Kiev. So that is the state of defense against aggression, a defense of democracy, defense of democracies that are subject to aggression. So, how can we keep democracy safe, since we enjoy its values and its virtues? Shouldn't we see if we can give it some sort of safety in international law? If you go back to 1938, when the League of Nations had collapsed and everyone was looking for a successor, and of course Stalin then was in bed with Hitler, working out how to carve up Poland, the idea came about of a group, an organization of parliamentary peoples, as H.G. Wells, the English visionary writer, called it, an organization of parliamentary peoples, to replace the United Nations with a human rights charter that could be enforced, and keeping out countries which were not democracies. We go back to that idea because the United Nations is worthless in terms of protecting democracy. We would perhaps have a combination of those states that have combined to pass Magnitsky laws, enabling them to sanction violators of human rights. They're democracies and they're prepared to take this action. You could add in the 124 nations that have signed up to the International Criminal Court. They're all more or less democracies, and the countries that have formed the core group that is meeting at the moment to try to construct a tribunal to try Vladimir Putin for the crime of aggression. May have to try him in absentia, but it's an important step. And so it may be that we should rethink the need for an organization that would have the power itself, because of the number of states, to create international law and to create an international law protection for democracy for the first time. You could envisage an organization which would enforce a human rights charter using its intellectual, its economic, and its political power in the world. You could envisage an organization that, in the course of forging resolutions that would protect democracy, and I'm not talking about a military alliance, unless it becomes necessary, or another talking shop of diplomats, certainly not, but a body that has a proper human rights charter with you could do something about the divide, which in many democracies is opening up between rich and poor, with a charter that includes social and economic rights, the right to a clean environment, the right to cultural heritage. Those matters could be and need to be better dealt with in this world. So I celebrate democracy with you, but I think it should be protected.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed for that very spirited delivery of your beliefs. Is it Zoe Zephyr or Zephyr? Zephyr. Okay. You're a member of the Montana House of Representatives of the USA. Would you like to make your introductory comments, please?
Yes, thank you so much. And as fun as it looked, I will stay seated for my remarks. When I think about democracy, I think about the way in which we have split up the levers of power. in the hopes that individually we can protect ourselves from violent overtakings within our states. But one of the things I also think there in the terms of what we have in a democracy and what we have in peaceful democracy is we have space. We have space for exchange of ideas. We have a space to slowly build power and shift paradigms. But also, as Estelle so wonderfully spoke about, we also have space for abuse. And I think in listening to the first panel and talking about the Council of Europe and the idea of, democracy, peace, and rule of law, we look at the way in which in my country, in the United States, that rule of law has often been used to suppress people, both black people in America, but even going back to sort of workers' rights, the way in which the union fights in the United States of America faced so much violence against them under our democracy, and so based on the rule of law. And so for me, that is one of the huge risks that we see in the country. And then also, as we saw in 2016, when someone with bad intentions gets the levers of power, there is the risk of violence escalates quickly. And we saw the way in which in the United States our courts sort of helped us bend but not break against the far right in the United States under President Trump. But also we're seeing the way in which when you have so many divested levers of power, those attacks can also come at the lower levels. We have in my state of Montana, at the school board level, there was a group that wanted to start a pro-LGBTQ club, and the response from parents was to show up with guns to the school. That is the risk of violence. That is the space that democracy gives us, but underpinning it is always that risk of violence. And what we see when people in power are looking to attack that peace or undercut the democracy, what they are trying to do initially is not come at it all at once, but to find the places that they can either make citizens forget that there is a struggle, as they've done when you talk about racism in America. It is often something that the populace imagines to be gone. Oh, we had a civil war. Oh, we had the civil rights movement, and now it's okay, or not as bad as you think it is. So there's a lot of pretending as a way to suppress the human rights of people. And then also individually, they look for groups to target. In my state and across the United States, in the last year, that has been LGBTQ Americans. There were 500 laws introduced in America last year to take away rights from queer Americans. That was more laws than in all of the last 10 years combined. That is an effort not for a particular community, but with the goal of tearing away one group that is fighting in solidarity. When the George Floyd protests happened in my country, in my state, we had Black organizers saying, this is wrong, talking, protesting. Who ran security for them? It was not our local police stations, it was the queer activists who worked together to keep them safe, because we know oftentimes that the rule of law is not going to be the thing that protects us from harm. So that, I think, I'll leave that as the opening statement for what we fight together for.
Very interesting critical point of view of the rule of law. You can also see which law who is protected by. So let's open directly the discussion. I hope the lunch was good, but that the blood already left the stomach, went back to the brain. So let's discuss. 93 is starting. Thanks to present yourself before your first question.
Thank you. My name is Patricia Lynn. I'm a retired politician from Northern Ireland and now the Chief Executive of the Institute for Disruption. And thank you to the panel for such a fascinating set of opening statements. My question is specifically to Jeffrey. if you please. I believe in democracy too, and I'm passionate about promoting it and protecting it, but what do we do in the case of Northern Ireland, where our government is currently collapsed, has been for a significant amount of time, almost 50% of the time since it's been established, and every time it's up and running again, it falls down. So we're struggling to try and promote the benefits of democracy in Northern Ireland, when more and more people are calling for direct rule instead of local governance.
I suggest maybe, as that's a very specific point to you, we answer that one immediately on the head rather than taking
Yes, in a quite, yes, exactly. Succinct answer, please, and then we open for wider discussion.
Sure, I know it's a disgrace, and the British government, of course, is partly responsible. But there are also moves within Ireland, and of course, it could get worse if if Britain leaves the European Union, as its government threatens. Then that pulls the rug out of the Northern Ireland Agreement. And here we go again, perhaps, with the Troubles, as they were euphemistically called once upon a time. The only thing that I can offer is the desire that there be a right to democracy in international law that could be used in a way to force these truculent parties in your country together. There is one case, goes back 20 years to Fiji, where an international court, after one of the coups, did say there is a right to democracy only if democracy is ousted, and then the usurping government has to prove that it's got public support. But that's the only case that I'm aware of where there's been argued as a right to democracy. The world is really silent on this concept having any legal force. I think it might have helped in your case in Ireland.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very specific point, so I think that was a good idea. Any other points or questions? Yes, 417. Sorry, we've already had one go. Maybe I'll take somebody else and then come back to you. Yes, what about 414?
It will come all by its own.
Thank you very much. My name is Oleg Volsky. I am a mayor of city Zhoukva, Lviv region in Ukraine. I'm from Ukraine. Today at this forum we discussed and talked about democracy and peace. Is it possible to put on equal sign between those two ideas? Today the war in Ukraine has been going on for 9 years. We courageously defend our country from Russia, a terrorist country. We have been protecting the entire democratic world for 9 years, and the price for this protection is extremely high. The lives of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers at the front line. Every day we lose our soldiers who died fighting against the Russians. Right now, in central square of my city of Zhoukva, a farewell ceremony is being held for 31 years old Taras Pitkovsky, who was lost in action in Donetsk region at front line of the war. In our Ukrainian delegation, we have Andriy Pisarenko, a legendary warrior. He has been fighting since the beginning of the war, fighting for each of us. After the forum, he will come to war to bring the victory of a good over evil, light over darkness, democracy over authoritarianism. Is it really possible to talk about democracy and peace, to equate them today when such country as Russia still work and still exist? Such a question, and I want that you talk with our defender Andriy Pisarenko, who is behind me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. We will take a next question from 3 to 8, please.
Thank you. I'm from Yerevan School of Political Studies. So special thanks to all our speakers and especially Geoffrey Robertson for speaking about Nagorno-Karabakh issue. And today's topic is very related to what is going to in Armenia now, because we know that Armenia is becoming more and more democratic, with sharing all the values of democratic country. But what is facing Armenia and struggles we are going through is awful. And it is vivid that not correct actions and not on-time actions of more democratical countries and organizations are making these issues more like kind of problematic and not solving it, because we know that Azerbaijan was keeping Armenian people in blockade, yes, more than 9 months, and everyone knew about it, and no one was speaking, yes, about it. And what happened next? They attacked the civilians, they killed a lot of civilians, and afterwards they have made ethnic cleansing of Armenian people. So we see, and we are speaking about that not correct actions on time has caused this. But what do you think? This gave more bigger appetite to Azerbaijan, and they are now talking about some other internationally recognized Armenian claims against Armenian territories. Don't you think that this is time to do some actions and prevent all the threats towards peace and be able to again put equality between peace and democracy? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your intervention. Just a second, we will take a third question from here, a little bit from the higher ranks. 398, and then we will ask you to answer to this intervention, please.
Yes, thank you. So I would like to ask a question to Mr. Robertson. I first would like to thank you for your presentation. It was a delightful presentation. My question is, we live in a society, and it seems sometimes that people are getting more violent. We see more violence, and violence starts at a very young age because of social media, because of the content that kids are exposed to. My question is, would you say, according to your experience, that there is more violence today in our societies? And if so, how can we tackle that issue? Because it seems that with each conflict, with each issue, there are so many lines that were crossed in terms of violence, and especially violence against civilians. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So, Mr. Jefferson, maybe I give a chance to our two female speakers to answer, and then I give the word back to you. So we have, who wants to answer? Please, you're so polite to each other. I give first the word to you, and then Mr. Jefferson will, please. Who wants to start?
Alors, je vais répondre sur les questions qui me semblent le plus à ma portée. Moi, je travaille sur les réseaux sociaux depuis 4 ans. Alors, clairement, en fait, ce que j'observe avec les réseaux sociaux, c'est que on observe beaucoup de violence, mais la question que je me pose, est-ce que c'est juste parce que maintenant nous avons des outils pour diffuser les images que nous le voyons plus? Donc ici, je vais plus répondre par des questions que par des affirmations. Aussi, moi, ce qui m'inquiète avec le fait que nous partagions autant d'images de violence, c'est qu'on se désensibilise. Le fait de voir autant d'images horrible là avec ce qui se passe par exemple à Gaza et en Israël, et qu'on soit tous en train de regarder ces images, est-ce que ça ne va pas nous désensibiliser? Moi, c'est plus des questions que je me pose à ce niveau-là. Aussi, moi, dans mon expertise, pour les personnes qui subissent ces violences, donc là, je pense au peuple ukrainien, au peuple arménien et à tous les peuples qui subissent des violences telles que le nettoyage ethnique, le génocide ou l'agression. Le problème aussi, c'est qu'on ne prend pas assez en compte la dimension psychologique en fait, de ces violences sur les personnes qui les subissent et de l'impact traumatique que ça peut créer en plusieurs générations. Donc je pense aujourd'hui que nous devons vraiment réfléchir à la façon dont nous utilisons nos réseaux sociaux. Comment garder la démocratie sur nos réseaux? Comment faire en sorte de visibiliser les violences sans nous désensibiliser? Ici, je n'ai pas de réponse claire, mais je pense que c'est des questions essentielles qu'on doit se poser, surtout au vu de l'augmentation des conflits et des agressions que nous observons dans le monde.
Thank you. I'm going to echo some of those sentiments if my translation was right in my ear. We talk about the use of technology and whether or not is there more violence, or are we seeing the violence more because we have access to it, and the risk that that poses to desensitize you to that violence potentially. But also we're seeing in America the way in which we are no longer getting information, for example, around what is happening in the Gaza Strip from only our government or only our main news. We are seeing live on the ground the things that are happening, which is why we've seen in America, in the younger generations, a huge shift in saying, no, we recognize that this isn't, you know, just a complicated issue with conflict that no one can understand. We're seeing an ethnic cleansing happening. We are seeing thousands of Gaza residents dying in the last month. So we get that benefit from technology, and with George Floyd as well, being able to record that. The other side of the coin is that we risk, much like any time there is a revolution, whether it's the Industrial Revolution or now with the technological revolution, the way in which those new technologies inherently disrupt existing systems, particularly industries and workers' lives. And much in the way that a government with ill intentions who is predisposed towards violence or totalitarianism can say, oh, it is this minority group coming after you, they can also say, oh, this technology has changed your life for the worse. And therefore, they will use that to consolidate power. So I think
thank you very much for the input. Mr. Jefferson. Mr. Robertson.
Well, we live in a world in which children can't turn on the television without seeing images of children being killed, bombed, strafed, whatever. This is new, and it is down to Israel and Hamas, but we've seen it in the last couple of years with Ukraine as well. And one has to be very sympathetic with the Ukrainian speaker, because he will have friends and relatives who are dying for democracy. And put it absolutely bluntly, this is a war of aggression, an illegal war by all our standards, which the UN does nothing about. So, and it's unleashed on this generation of children. I don't know how they will grow up fearful or angry. I certainly know that the generations in Palestine will grow up even angrier as a result of Israel's tactics. But there you go. It is, I was the first president of the UN's War Crimes Court in Sierra Leone, where faction pioneered a peculiarly anti-democratic crime against humanity. There was a UN referendum, and they went through, after people voted, they went through this faction, villagers taking people up, saying, what hand did you hold the pen? Hold it out. They chopped it off. Chopping of those who had exercised their democratic right. Well, that was bad enough. There were recruitment of child soldiers and so forth in those days. But today, it's an entirely different matter. And when asked about Armenia, Armenia's tragedy has been how much it's been tied to Russia. Tragedy when Lenin, at the bequest of Ataturk back in 1921, granted it as to Azerbaijan and not to Armenia, although it was 90% Armenian and remained that until the war, and in 1994 it began its democratic existence that in Nagorno-Karabakh was snuffed out a couple of weeks ago. Of course, Azerbaijan should be expelled from the Council of Europe. If it does believe in democracy. It expelled Russia, although Russia pretended that it had left of its own accord, but Russia was expelled after Ukraine. So this is the Magnitsky view, or the view of Magnitsky sanctions, that you should not allow people or countries to be part of your civilized democratic society if they involve themselves in war crimes. And the war in Ukraine is a crime of itself. So I do think that there are ways that we can show our distaste and more create laws that actually protect democracy.
Thank you so much. We will take the next round of questions. We have 331. We hit it, yes.
Donc bonjour à tous, je me présente, je suis Adèle Eifer, je suis étudiant en sciences historiques et j'avais donc une question qui est à propos de la démocratie. Pouvons-nous dire que les institutions mondiaux ont failli à leur devoir de protection vis-à-vis des pays tels que l'Ukraine ou même de la protection de la bande de Gaza? Voilà.
Très intéressant aspect.
Merci. Nous avons 436.
Thank you very much. I am Dorilda Kachuli. I'm from Albania. In fact, my question is connected a bit with Western Balkan countries, since, for example, Albania has now opened the negotiation process, and I wanted to ask you, in order of democracy and functioning of institutions, do you think that we do have had the necessary support when it comes to the rule of law process and also in development of the economy of our country? Do you see that Europe has more to do in these two areas in our countries? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will take another one from this side. Do we have there was somebody up there? Yes, okay, you will get it. Just a moment. I can't read your number. 134, please. 134.
Please give me the question. Hello.
Thank you for presenting yourself.
No. Please. So I got the questions from my fellows in Southeast Asia. We have one representative from Myanmar. First off, I am a youth delegate from the Council of Europe. I came from Thailand, and I have a friend from Myanmar, Vietnam, and Singapore. So the question. So one of them asked me about the question. Sorry. Please.
We wait for you.
I would say what she wrote it in the document. I like to address situations in Myanmar, which my Burmese colleague and I usually discuss about. The international community always talks about peace, dialogue, and reconciliation. But what do you think about armed resistance that is currently happening in Myanmar? Because the international community usually paints it as a bad thing. It comes with grave consequences, but what if all non-violence resistance fail? And the international community couldn't do anything helpful to help them achieve what they want. Is democracy really equal to peace? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And maybe one more question. So we have a whole variety of things. Yes, 335.
Hi, everyone. I'm a youth delegate. I'm from Guatemala. My name is Adriana. I would like to ask a question regarding the involvement of other regions of the world in these processes. For example, Latin America. In Guatemala, an enduring dictatorship tramples our rights to expression and protest. The current government is perpetrating violence against our people and doesn't want to let the newly elected president transition to power. Yet, the media and the conversations always focuses on the West, and Latin America's democratic voice is often abandoned and not fully covered. This this leaves aside intercultural dialogue and intersectionality in human rights discussions. So I would like to ask, how can we ensure that conversations about democracy and human rights include diverse voices, like those from Latin America, East Asia, Middle East, and don't just focus on Western perspectives? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we heard about Myanmar, we heard about this part, Latin America, South America. Who would like to start? Please, Zoe.
Yes, thank you. In terms of how do you make sure that they are, those topics are brought up, I think when I think about representation in government at its fundamental level, you need people who have, I would call them lenses, through which they understand the issues. And I know that, again, talking about Israel-Palestine, the way in which having a Palestinian American in the United States of Congress shifts the conversation. I know Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez led the first delegation, all Spanish-speaking delegation, down to Latin America. And those feel small sometimes because it's one delegation going forward. It's not the media talking about it. And we have to acknowledge, again, the media's, I'm not going to say bias, but propensity towards discussing things in the regions that they're in. And we see this in the way in which peaceful democracies oftentimes look inward to themselves and celebrate their accomplishments, oftentimes while ignoring crises happening across the world, or crises that aren't politically convenient. It may be easy for the United States to say Russia is doing a war of aggression against Ukraine because there is not that alliance there, versus in Israel, it's a lot harder for them to say that, even though it shouldn't take more moral courage to call out senseless violence. We see the way in which, even as you drop below the level of government and look into something like, talking about how easy it is to go around the world and, in my country and shop and do something, and now you look and you see laborers in Bangladesh going on strike. The celebrations we have internally often come at the expense of the places external to our countries, and the way you begin to address that is through representation in government.
Is certainly a very important aspect. Who would like to add something to the answer? Mr. Robertson, maybe? For especially also this question, did the international institution fail regarding Ukraine? This was quite a succinct but interesting question. Please just take your microphone. We just need your mic, otherwise we can't hear you.
It was still going on, so evidently it's failed. But I do think that the thing about George Floyd was important in this way, as well as others, that it was actually seen. What happened to George Floyd usually takes place behind the door of a prison cell. That was how Magnitsky was killed in a Russian prison. He just had someone who was prepared to fight for him, and so to give rise to Magnitsky laws. But what we must do, I think, in connection with George Floyd is to make police enforcement as transparent as possible. I mean, years ago now, I was a young barrister fighting for to have recording devices in police cells, to have cameras in police cells, because police were fond of beating people up and verbaling them, pretending that they had made confessions that they hadn't. So that's, I think, one lesson. The gentleman from Thailand, and I think Thailand is an interesting case where you have a party elected, you have protesters protesting for democracy, you have a sex-mad king holed up in Germany in a castle. And the thing, people are prosecuted, sent to prison for a crime with a wonderful French name, lèse-majesté. And this crime would be struck down under any human rights treaty, but it stops any muttering of criticism of the king. In Myanmar, of course, things are terrible. Aung San Suu Kyi and her government are in prison, facing long prison sentences, and the Rohingya are being more persecuted than ever. They were persecuted under her government, but by gosh, they're being persecuted under the cruel colonels. I think they've elevated themselves to generals who run the dictatorship. As for Guatemala, yes, that's a worry. Perhaps there's been too much foreign interference, but I think there have been improvements. And throughout South America, it's interesting, South American states, back when the UN were formed, were very important, and they still are. I was Lula's defense counsel in the UN when he was framed and jailed, actually, for a crime that wasn't a crime. And he's shown, now that he's wrestled the country from Bolsonaro, that Brazil can be an important player in the world. And I think that's the case with other South American countries, which on the whole have been in favor of democracy.
Thank you so much. Would you like to add something?
So, okay, let's have another round of questions. There are quite a few people. Yes, we have 64, I think.
Yes, I am Asma Naim from Sudan, and I'm a civil society activist, but also I'm associate professor at the Center for Peace and Development Studies and Faculty of Economics in University of Bahri, Sudan. So my question is that for the three speakers, first, really very thankful what we are hearing now, but do you think that is what is being done up to now is enough? That is like this forum, people are just like protesting, or the social media, what we are doing. I mean, just like to raise the democracy and to protect people, or the security of people, or social security. If not, and I think it is not enough, if not, can you please exactly suggest or give recommendations how we can improve the things to come up with a real democracy in the world, and even to protect, the human beings, the real.
Do you have any suggestions? It sounds like you have a few suggestions. You've
No,
asked
She's looking for a good list.
I will be really appreciating, the speakers, if they have, because maybe they have more experience than I in this.
Absolutely. Very nice question.
Thank you very
we
much.
already talked about, of course, education, but you will certainly add other things. 320. It will come all by you. Don't touch anything. They do it normally. 320, please. It's maybe because you.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Thank you very much. So actually, soon Europe is going to celebrate Christmas, and more or less we know what European kids want for Christmas. And do you know what do 30,000 kids displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh want for Christmas? I can tell you: food, roof on their head, and also warm blanket. And this is all because Europe was unable to protect democracy. Europe was unable to protect democratic society, and failed to protect Armenia, which in the last 5 years adopted democratic course of governance. And I strongly disagree with the title of our forum. Peace doesn't entail us to, democracy doesn't entail us to peace. Vice versa. For Armenia, it led to devastating war. Thousands of people were killed, And many people, hundreds of people, are now detained in Azerbaijan. And what does Europe do for this? Just silence. Just silence. And my question is the following. How do you protect democracies? And what can you say to Armenians who have gone through all these difficulties in the last years? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask you maybe to, you didn't introduce yourself, or maybe you don't want to, but it's always interesting if you want to say who you are.
I'm from Armenia. My name is Manuel Keshishan.
Thank you very much. So we take another question of the row. 180, please.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm Patricia from Zambia. And my question is revolving around one message that has come out strongly in the room, and that is there are gaps and so many flaws in different democratic systems that exist around the world. So I'd like to ask, what exactly would you suggest is the immediate call to action at individual, at community, and at institutional levels? Because we know that global democracies are ever evolving, and how can we make this action-based response more inclusive, interactive, and comprehensive for everybody to have a role to play in creating democracies that are healthy and that respect the democratic principles that exist? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So on an individual level is your question, what we can do each other. A last one, and then we go for the answers.
Let's have 71, maybe.
He was quicker than me.
Hi, thank you so much for the question. My name is Amy. I'm from Canada. I'm also a youth delegate at the Council of Europe. My question is for Zoe. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. I'm actually your discussant for the forum tomorrow. I admire your work so much for transgender rights. My question is to you, in which ways is political partisanship a hindrance or a positive to the pursuit of democracy, peace, and human rights? I'm also from Canada, so I'm your friendly northern neighbor. And I was wondering if human rights are supposed to be inalienable, universal, applicable for all, but some human rights are accepted by partisan ties and not by others. When we're divided in North America especially, we're so divided by party lines that oftentimes we argue more about human rights instead of making it applicable for all. What do you think are some ways in which we can come together in collective pursuit of democracy and human rights when so many people become divided and caught up between political boundaries when it comes to human rights? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. The question of division, of course, and be united for the same fight. Who would like to start? Go ahead, please. Estelle Desprez.
Alors, je vais répondre pour la question par rapport au Soudan et qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire maintenant. Alors, moi, je pense sincèrement que les systèmes qu'on a créés jusqu'aujourd'hui sont défaillants. Moi, je ne crois pas que notre système néolibéral fonctionne. Je pense qu'il met notre planète à risque et je pense que tout est lié. Martin Luther King disait qu'il y avait 3 mots principaux dans notre société. La pauvreté, le militarisme et la guerre. Il disait que si on ne se débarrasse pas de l'un, on n'arrivera pas à se débarrasser de tous les problèmes qu'on a dans notre société. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire maintenant? Moi, je ne pense pas qu'en continuant à exploiter les ressources de manière sauvage, notamment dans les pays d'Afrique, moi je suis d'origine congolaise, ce qu'il se passe là maintenant au Congo, pour moi, est un exemple de tous les problèmes dans notre planète qui ne fonctionnent pas. C'est l'exploitation capitaliste sauvage des ressources qui s'ancre dans un contexte néocolonial. C'est la violence patriarcale et les viols utilisés sur le corps des femmes. Et je rappelle que le Congo est une société démocratique. Alors, je vous avoue que moi, quand je suis venue ici aujourd'hui, je me suis beaucoup posé la question de la démocratie. Et ça a l'air peut-être bête pour beaucoup de personnes, mais moi, la démocratie, je ne l'ai jamais prise pour un acquis, car ce n'est pas un système qui me parle. Je vis dans un système qui, moi, ne me laisse pas vraiment ma place. Il y a tellement d'inégalités qui sont liées à plein d'autres systèmes d'oppression qui fait que moi, la démocratie, c'est un peu une chimère. Donc, est-ce que la démocratie apporte la paix? Il faudrait déjà qu'elle apporte la paix au sein même de ces sociétés. Et je ne pense pas qu'aujourd'hui, ça peut fonctionner tant qu'on reste sur les mêmes modèles et sur les mêmes institutions. Ça peut paraître radical, mais moi, je suis plus pour changer de fond les institutions, voire en construire de nouvelles. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire maintenant pour protéger les droits humains? Avoir ces conversations, c'est déjà super important, et je pense qu'il faut se permettre de penser en dehors des cadres dominants qu'on nous a donnés. penser en dehors des institutions telles qu'elles sont aujourd'hui parce qu'elles ne fonctionnent pas. On voit bien qu'il y a des génocides qui se passent pour l'instant, qu'on a des grands discours, mais que pourtant on abandonne des milliers, voire des millions de personnes à leur sort derrière des grands discours. Donc, moi, je suis quelqu'un d'assez fataliste et je pense qu'on peut essayer de garder le bon de nos idéaux, mais repenser la façon dont elles sont articulées dans nos sociétés. Ça me semble important. Et au niveau individuel, ce que je dirais, c'est que justement, essayer d'imaginer d'autres mondes possibles. D'autres mondes possibles avec des valeurs qui protègent réellement les droits humains. Je pense qu'on doit vraiment essayer de penser en dehors du cadre qu'on nous donne pour l'instant, parce que force est de constater, ça ne fonctionne pas. Force est de constater, le capitalisme est en train de détruire notre planète. Force est de constater que nos sociétés ont plus à cœur de s'armer et de créer de la mort et de la guerre, plutôt que d'essayer de résoudre les problèmes sociaux. Donc moi, je dirais juste, essayons de penser autrement et dans d'autres structures.
Merci beaucoup. Please, Zoe.
Thank you. So I talked initially about the sort of divested levers of power in democracy. I also think it fractures a sense of responsibility. There are individuals who would say, well, I have voted, and therefore, you know, I did my part. Or who on the other side would look and say, why isn't my US government, why isn't the UN doing something? And I think that you start with that being a core problem of sort of divested responsibility, which then shifts to the question of how do you act at the local level, at the individual level. And I am a union member and union worker, and I think a lot about the way in which unions fought back against systems of power, corporate capitalistic greed, and how that work always, always, always starts at the local level. And so for me, when it's what can an individual do, I often say the work is to find the room, however small, that your voice is needed in, and then you do two things. You kick the door in, and then you convince them that they invited you in. And that's the layer there. Now, again, that work is also both intra-community and across other communities with the intersectionality. You know, we know, for example, in the AIDS epidemic in America, our government was not listening as gay men were dying. Who was taking care of them? Lesbian women in hospitals. It was our community taking care of one another. But in the same time, you know, I have to make sure as I stand up talking about LGBTQ rights that I understand the way it's connected. You know, as a trans woman, I daily health care that I need to take to maintain my quality of life. That puts me in dialogue with diabetics, who likewise are taking regular medication. And so we make sure that our groups are connected so that when we go to our government, whether we're providing grievances from the outside or the inside, that we're coming together. And as Estella and I talked over lunch, if there is a system that you feel like is not addressing your needs and you feel as though you're imprisoned in that system, you need people on the outside of it and on the inside of it digging their way out. You escape faster from both sides. And then to the final question around how do you address core issues when there is so much political division around cultural issues. And for me, the answer to that is you have to, again, bring it to the individual level. You have to have conversations one-on-one with a ridiculous amount of people. Because we know, for example, when it comes to LGBTQ rights, there is people who know someone who is queer, they are about 30 percentage points more likely to support their rights. So you fight on that level again and again and again, and you plant the seeds, and sometimes they bear fruit. In my state of Montana, we are controlled by a very conservative government, but we have the most progressive constitution in the United States, in which we have an explicit protection where it says the government must maintain and enhance a clean environment. That came from people at the small individual level in a room of 30 who kicked the door in, laid that groundwork, planted those seeds so that 30 years from now, when our government was ignoring the climate crisis, we had Held versus Montana, the first court case in the world where teenagers sued our government for failing to act on climate change and won. So that's the work at the ground level.
Very good individual level of action. Very good inspiration for the room, I think so. Mr. Robertson, please.
Sudan, yes, everyone turned away from Sudan thanks to the bombing of Ukraine, but I think some 70,000 people were killed there. And the UN did nothing. Then after a while, when the killings went down, the Human Rights Council, which is a bit more active.
Yes, a little bit higher, otherwise they can't translate you, please. Just a little bit higher to your mouth.
The Human Rights Council did send a fact-finding mission, which in true UN style has not yet reported, although it's had a year or more to decide which the government or the opposition faction is more responsible. I have to say that the opposition faction used to be known in the Darfur days as the Janjaweed, and there was a warrant for their arrest for genocide against the people of Darfur way back in the 90s. So they wouldn't have been there to start or to fight the war if the ICC had worked in those days. As for the children of Armenia, what can be done for them? They've grown up in the extraordinary, beautiful country in the clouds that was Nagorno-Karabakh, their homes, their culture, their churches, Christian churches, have been destroyed or occupied by Azeri families. Well, I suggest that you or the government of Armenia should ask them what they want for Christmas. Get them to put down what toys, what trains, what planes, not guns, which they will probably ask for, some of them, and let them be bought and presented to them by the Council of Europe with a card apologizing for the fact that it betrayed its mission and turned its back on democracy when the aggressors came.
Thank you for that suggestion. Anyway, okay, we'll have to do one final round of questions. We've got 10 minutes left on this round table. Who would like to, anybody over here? I think we had you before.
I have a wonderful 94 who is waiting really for a long time. 94, please. Yes, please.
My name is John Bond. I come from Britain. I feel one of the important things is that we are not powerless. We have to make a decision ourselves in our hearts that we are going to be responsible for the future of our countries. And if we do that, then I think we begin to see. I can't say what everyone in their different situations is meant to do. I know I made that decision. One thing it led me to do was to become a friend of my Member of Parliament. And that's gone on for some years. She's now chair of the Labour Party. I wrote to her yesterday, and I put 2 points to her, which could help, I believe, the Labour Party's stance on the situation in Gaza, which is a mess at the moment. She immediately wrote back this morning and said, those are 2 important points. I will put them to our leaders. And I just think that everyone can say, we are not powerless. We can do something.
Thank you so much. I think this statement really deserves a big applause. Thank you for not asking a question, to just saying this.
Let's go up to 759.
Here we go.
Hello.
Perfect.
Hello. I'm Anna Kuprava, Young European Ambassador from Georgia. And it's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for your amazing plenary session. My question is following. As you know, and it's mentioned before, most of the rules are written in the Constitution, and on EU and UN level, they're actually written, but they're not really binding in reality. So we're pretending that nowadays the situation is better, but we have further issues. Moreover, when we talk about equality and promotion of democratic development in all communities, those who are under war or crisis or occupation, as for example Georgia is Currently, as Georgian youth, we do not have same opportunities for democratic and Western development. How do you see solution in this problem, and what do you recommend us to do? Me and my Georgian youth fellows, what can we do to promote equal and democratic development in our community? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Yes, please. For 132, please.
Hi, everyone. I am Gülhanim. I'm from Azerbaijan. First of all, I would like to thank you, all the speakers, for their presentations. I have one remark and one question to Mr. Robertson. I would like to, like you touched upon the case of Karabakh, I would like to say that what happened in September and what happened actually in 2020, it was just, it wasn't like a vacuum, it was the result of the ignorance of the international community, including European countries. And I would like to say that for 3 decades, 600,000 Azerbaijanis were deprived from their human right to live on their territory. And now I am not saying about the Karabakh, I am saying about the 7 adjacent regions of Azerbaijan which were kept by Armenia as a just buffer zone. So my question is here would be, how to eliminate these double standards, ignorance and biases when it comes to human rights among the international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. We will take another from this part here. Who would like to add a question? 332, and I think then we can turn to the answers, and we will be slowly but certainly at the end of this session. Please.
Hello, do you hear me? So, hello, my name is Zora. I am a history student here in Strasbourg, and first of all, I want to thank everyone for the questions and for the answers. And my question is kind of related to everything that has been said before. I would like to ask, how do we protect our democracy while also taking into account other political systems? Because as we heard, half of the world population lives in countries which don't have democracies, and we have to live with those countries. And also we are sometimes we must take action towards certain things that are done by those countries, for example, with Azerbaijan or Russia and other countries. But we must also take into account that we are collaborating with those countries sometimes because we need the resources, and maybe there is economic questions and things that we need to, in order for our economy to work, we need to collaborate with these systems. So how do we protect our democracy, and how can we call ourselves democratic countries when we are enabling some of the things that those other countries who are not democracies are doing? And how can we maybe stop it without having a stop to our mutual partnership?
Very good question. Thank you so much. And thank you, by the way, to all of you to be so polite to addressing each other. I really like this very much today. Please.
So vast questions, a lot of very complicated points. We would like to stop it on time because we have 5 panel members who are waiting. So I'm going to give you 1 minute each to address maybe one point that you would like to make to conclude or to answer some of the questions. Absolutely.
Mr. Robertson, this time you start, and then the ladies, if you're okay. Just a mic. You have a wonderful voice, but still you need the mic.
Georgia, yes, well, try to release the leader of the Rose Revolution, will you? The one that Zelensky asked for, the one who cleaned up corruption, who's dying in your prison. Put that to your government. But now for the double standards. Gosh, that's difficult to answer. There are so many hypocrisies in the human rights arena, in the diplomatic arena. God, I almost vomited when I was watching Al Jazeera and they brought on the Iranian foreign minister speaking to the UN condemning Israel. And I remembered the number of atrocities that his government has produced, the killing of 20,000 prisoners, because they weren't prepared to worship as the government wished. So, yes, double standards as he condemned Israel. I think the only way to sort them out is to try to get independent judges. That's the answer. independent judges and rely on independent courts. That's part of democracy. It's a vital part of democracy. And of course, we must work with non-democracies on climate change and other things, and we have, to some extent, helped to reduce forced labor in those countries. But, as I say, democracy itself lacks legal protection.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Zoe?
It's a tough question. And I think one of the difficult parts of it is that there's not a perfect answer. You know, we first acknowledged that the goal itself is not democracy, like that's not an end goal, that you're trying to help the people who are living their daily lives have lives where they can feel comfortable in their homes, they can live peacefully and prosper. And when you talk about how do you engage in a peaceful society with bad actors or other, whether they're just other forms of government or genuine bad actors trying to do harm, it's a question of how do you utilize what we would call in America soft power. And that is really difficult because it's easy to come up and say, okay, well, if someone does bad, you know, we are a global community, we impose sanctions, etc. But then we talk about the way in which, you know, the speaker in the first plenary panel did a wonderful example talking about how throughout Africa, sanctions that have been enacted are used then to foment additional atrocities down the line for blaming Western nations when it comes to trying to uphold human rights within the country. And so you struggle to find an answer to that is genuine and is a win for everyone. I think courts, as Jeffrey said, is one of the key examples. But other than that, and this is the hardest part for me, is you have to be relentless in your moral stance. And you have to, whatever room you are in, whatever country you are in, sort of bang relentlessly towards progress and trust that at some point the paradigm will shift. And when we are in other countries that are, you know, like America, where we're engaging with some non-democratic countries or other democratic countries that we don't see eye to eye with, it becomes a question of how do we make sure that we are not prioritizing a system of government, but we are prioritizing the individual level. And I think for me, and I think Estelle has touched on this, that we haven't said it explicitly, a lot of that